The Blackwood estate overlooked the cliffs of Monterey Bay like a sentinel of steel and glass. At dawn, the ocean stretched out beneath it, restless, silver-tipped waves colliding against dark rocks echoing through the morning mist. Inside, the mansion was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the automated blinds rising along the 20-foot windows. Damian Blackwood stood in his private study, a sleek room lined with digital monitors, glass shelves, and abstract art that looked as though emotion had been carefully erased from every stroke. At 36, he was the founder and CEO of Blackwood Systems, a global network security firm that guarded the data of nations, corporations, and billionaires. Ironically, the man who built the world's most trusted digital walls lived behind the thickest, emotional walls of all. Damian's reflection in the window revealed a man carved from self-discipline and guarded intellect. His black hair was combed back with precision, and his eyes, a steely, almost metallic blue, scanned everything with analytical focus. The world called him brilliant, ruthless visionary. What they didn't see was the cost of that title: years of solitude, the abandonment of love, and the betrayal that had turned his faith in people into dust. His father's company had been stolen through deceit when Damian was 22, leaving him to rebuild from ashes. Since then, trust was not an emotion. It was a liability. Every deal was verified, every person investigated, every employee monitored by the network of security feeds that encircled his mansion like a digital moat. The estate's technology mirrored his nature, elegant, efficient, yet mercilessly precise. Drones patrolled the grounds, biometric locks sealed each door, and hundreds of silent cameras watched hallways, gardens, and galleries. To outsiders, the Blackwood estate was a marvel of modern engineering. To Damian, it was a glass fortress, beautiful, impenetrable, and utterly isolating. That same morning, a soft-spoken woman named Lily Adams arrived at the service gate. She carried a modest suitcase, a folded letter of employment, and the quiet composure of someone who had learned resilience through hardship. At 27, she had worked in hotels, offices, and private residences, earning a reputation for being dependable, gentle, and unfailingly discreet. Life had never been easy. Her mother's illness had drained every savings, and her younger brother's college dreams depended entirely on her steady income. Yet what set Lily apart wasn't her struggle. It was the grace with which she carried it. Even exhaustion couldn't dim the spark in her eyes, a warmth that came not from naivety, but from the conviction that kindness, no matter how small, could still change something in this cold world. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Renata Cole, a dignified woman in her 60s with the posture of a soldier and the heart of a grandmother, met her at the entrance. "You must be Miss Adams," she said, her accent touched with Old English refinement. "Welcome to Blackwood Estate. We keep things orderly here, not just clean but balanced. Mr. Blackwood appreciates precision." Lily smiled softly and nodded. "I understand, ma'am. I'll do my best." There was sincerity in her voice that made Mrs. Cole's stern features ease into a faint smile. The mansion was more magnificent than anything Lily had ever seen. Glass corridors framed by cascading indoor gardens, sculptures that looked alive in the morning light, floors so polished that her reflection followed her with every step. But beneath the beauty, she sensed something else, a chill, like the air inside a museum where time had stopped. The rooms were immaculate, but they didn't feel lived in. Every cushion perfectly aligned, every picture frame symmetrical. It was as though the house was waiting for life to begin, but had long since forgotten how. Her first assignment was to maintain the West Wing, the guest quarters and observatory lounge that overlooked the sea. It was said that Mr. Blackwood rarely entertained visitors, yet insisted the guest areas remain in flawless condition, as if he were preparing for an arrival that would never come. Lily set to work with practiced precision, dusting the carved frames, aligning the crystal ornaments, and wiping the glass panels that opened toward the sky. The observatory itself was breathtaking, a domed chamber of glass and titanium where the Pacific horizon met the infinite heavens. A telescope stood at its center like an altar of curiosity, surrounded by a ring of white leather seats. When the morning light poured through the dome, the entire room shimmered like a prism. Lily paused for a moment, closing her eyes to breathe in the salty wind that filtered through the automatic vents. For a brief second, she felt peace, something she hadn't felt in months. She whispered to herself, "You're here, Lily." One step closer to giving Daniel his future. It was her quiet mantra, a reminder that her sacrifices were not in vain. Above, in his office, Damien reviewed his morning reports. He didn't remember hiring anyone new. Personnel updates were typically handled by Renata and Security Chief Nathan Graves. But a notification blinked on his monitor. New staff clearance, L. Adams. Level C authorization approved. He clicked the file, scanning her background. No criminal record. Excellent references, stable employment history. A handwritten note from Renata was attached. Hardworking, humble, and trustworthy. Reminds me of your mother, sir. Damien's jaw tightened slightly at the mention. His mother, Eliza Blackwood, had been a kind woman who believed goodness was its own kind of wealth. She had died when Damien was 25, long before his empire was complete, but the echoes of her compassion haunted him. Hours passed. Lily worked through the guest lounge, her movements efficient yet graceful, like someone who took pride in small things others might ignore. When she polished the telescope lens, her reflection appeared, a faint ghostly shimmer against the curve of the glass. She smiled faintly, then turned to adjust a lamp behind her. The cleaning solution she carried was new to her, a powerful industrial formula provided by the estate's maintenance team. When she leaned forward to reach a high corner of the domed window, the bottle slipped from her grasp, spilling its sharp-scented contents across her sleeve and blouse. The liquid burned against her skin, not dangerously, but enough to sting. She winced and glanced toward the hall. The nearest staff restroom was 2 floors below, but she carried a spare uniform in her trolley. Her instinct told her to act quickly. Chemical irritation was nothing to ignore. She moved to the far side of the observatory, behind the tall arc of an indoor sculpture, a twisting form of silver metal and glass that rose like frozen fire. It shielded her completely from the doorway. Without hesitation, she slipped out of her stained blouse, muttering under her breath about her clumsiness. There was no vanity in her movements, only the efficiency of someone handling an inconvenient accident. Within moments, she had changed into her clean uniform and sealed the damaged one inside a laundry bag. She thought nothing of it, unaware that above her, one of the observatory's ceiling cameras had recorded the brief moment before auto-deleting the footage per privacy protocols. But Damien saw the alert before the system erased it. A small flash on his dashboard labeled, "Camera Disruption, Observatory." Curious, he opened the feed just in time to see the system auto-clear the frame. For a fleeting second, his heart jumped. Not out of voyeuristic impulse, but shock, realizing how close the system had come to crossing an ethical line he had never truly considered. His entire life was built on surveillance, data, and protection through observation. Yet at that instant, he understood how thin the line was between safety and violation. The guilt hit him with unexpected force. He immediately accessed the internal configuration, purged the buffer cache, and disabled the observatory camera entirely. Then he sat back, his expression tight, staring out the window where the ocean glimmered beneath the sun. For the first time in years, he felt shame, not the kind born of failure, but of awakening. He had designed his world to be flawless, but in doing so, he had stripped it of humanity. And that humanity had just appeared in the form of a woman who didn't even know he existed beyond the name on her paycheck. That evening, Damien couldn't focus on his projects. Numbers blurred into abstractions. Financial forecasts meant nothing. He found himself wondering about Lily, the way she had spoken when Renata introduced her briefly that morning. Her tone soft but confident, her smile genuine, unguarded. She hadn't looked at him with admiration or fear, but simple respect. He had forgotten what that felt like. Downstairs, Lily finished her shift long after sunset. Most of the household staff had gone home, but she lingered to tidy the observatory one last time. The night sky above was a canvas of stars, and through the glass dome she could see her reflection mingled with constellations. She whispered to herself, "One day Daniel will see this. He'll look at the stars and know everything is possible." She didn't know that Damien stood quietly outside the door, unseen, hearing those words. He had come down to speak to her, to apologize for a mistake she didn't even know existed. But when he saw her gazing upward, whispering to the stars, something stopped him. It was as though the universe had cracked open a forgotten memory. his mother's voice reading to him as a boy. The brightest stars are those who shine not for themselves, but to guide others. He turned silently and walked away, his heart unsettled. For a man who controlled empires, he felt completely unprepared for the storm Lily Adams had unknowingly brought into his life. That night, Damien sat alone in his office, the mansion dark except for the city lights reflected in the glass walls. He opened a file on his computer. System audit, ethical compliance. He began typing a memo to his security chief. Effective immediately, disable all non-essential interior cameras. Privacy must be prioritized over efficiency. We protect people, not invade them. When he finished, he exhaled deeply, realizing it was the first time he had made a decision not out of logic, but conscience. Meanwhile, in her small staff quarters, Lily wrote in her journal, a habit she had kept since childhood. First day at the Blackwood estate. The house feels like a world made of mirrors, beautiful but lonely. Mr. Blackwood seems like a man who has everything yet carries nothing that makes him happy. Maybe that's why people like us are here, to remind the world that small things still matter. She closed the notebook, turned off her lamp and let the sound of the waves lull her to sleep. But across the mansion, Damien's mind refused rest. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits or risks. He was thinking about purpose, about the fragile, unguarded humanity that his empire had buried beneath algorithms and steel. He looked again at the ocean, at the endless dark horizon that mirrored his life. Vast, powerful, but empty. Somewhere deep inside something stirred, something long forgotten, the faintest whisper of hope. The following week at the Blackwood estate unfolded like a slow sunrise after a storm, quietly, but with the faint promise of light. The Pacific wind carried a mild chill, rolling through the glass corridors and echoing faintly across the marble floors. The mansion, usually a realm of calculated precision, had begun to breathe differently since Lily Adams arrived. There was no announcement of change, no visible shift in Damien Blackwood's demeanor, yet the rhythm of the estate itself seemed altered. Flowers once ignored were suddenly refreshed daily, the faint scent of lavender drifting through the halls. Soft instrumental music played in the evenings, a detail no one could remember hearing before. Even Mrs. Renata Cole, who had served the household for decades, sensed something intangible stirring beneath the stillness. Lily had settled into her duties with quiet diligence. Her mornings began before sunrise, polishing the brass handles of the west corridor doors until they gleamed like gold, followed by arranging the guest wing linens with an artisan's precision. She worked not as someone obeying orders, but as though each action carried sacred intent. When she polished a vase, she imagined it bringing calm to the room. When she opened the windows, she imagined releasing the mansion's heavy silence into the fresh sea air. To her, every task was a form of gratitude, for the chance to rebuild her life, for the chance to help her younger brother Daniel chase his future, and for the strange blessing of being part of something far larger than herself. Damien watched from a distance, though not in the way his security systems once demanded. His interest was no longer one of control but of curiosity. He had ordered most of the interior cameras removed days ago, keeping only those necessary for exterior defense. The estate felt less like a fortress and more like a home, though the word still felt foreign on his tongue. Every morning, when he descended the spiral staircase on his way to the study, he would see Lily working in the corridor near the observatory. She would always greet him with a soft, genuine smile, never forced or rehearsed. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she'd say with warmth, and he would reply with a polite nod, pretending to be absorbed in his tablet, though the tone of her voice would linger with him long after he had walked away. It was on the third Wednesday of her employment that something subtle yet profound occurred. A delivery truck had arrived late, the driver new and unfamiliar with the estate's strict entry protocol. When the vehicle stalled near the north gate, one of the security staff grew impatient, raising his voice. Lily, who happened to be arranging the courtyard flowers nearby, approached with calm composure. She didn't command or scold. She simply spoke with kindness, diffusing the tension with a few words and a reassuring smile. "Everyone has their first day somewhere," she said softly to the guard. "We can be firm without being cruel." The guard immediately softened, the driver relaxed, and the moment passed without incident. What no one knew was that Damien had seen it all from his office window. He had watched the entire exchange unfold in silence, astonished that something as simple as empathy could resolve what his systems and policies never could. That evening, Damien found himself wandering the mansion, a rare occurrence. He usually confined himself to his study, gym, or library, but something compelled him to walk. He found Lily in the greenhouse, a glass extension overlooking the cliffside, her hands gently trimming the edges of a wilted fern. The sunset washed through the glass panels in bands of orange and rose gold, painting her figure in light. For a moment, Damien hesitated to speak. She looked so peaceful, as if she belonged there more than anyone else ever had. Finally, he cleared his throat softly. "Miss Adams." Lily turned, startled but not nervous. "Mr. Blackwood, good evening, sir." "I was just maintaining the plants," he finished, his voice even but quiet. "I can see that." She smiled modestly, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. "They don't like neglect, sir. It's strange, but plants are a lot like people. If you water them too much, they drown. Too little, they wither. But if you give them balance, they thrive quietly without asking for much." Her words struck him harder than she realized. Balance, the one thing his empire lacked. Damien had mastered every measurable form of control, but not balance. His life was an equation where success equaled solitude, where safety demanded distance, where loyalty was tested but never trusted. "I've never been good at balance," he admitted before he could stop himself. Lily tilted her head gently, sensing there was more behind that confession than mere humility. "Maybe not yet," she said simply, "but everything can be relearned, sir. Even peace." He stood there longer than necessary, his usual sharp composure softening for a fraction of a second. "You remind me of someone," he murmured. "Someone who believed the world could still be kind. Your mother, perhaps?" Lily guessed, though her tone was gentle, not presumptuous. Damien's eyes lifted to hers in surprise. "Yes, how did you—" "She used to sing to the staff sometimes, didn't she?" Lily said. "Renata mentioned it once. Said the house used to feel alive then." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Damien nodded faintly, his voice distant. "It hasn't felt alive for a long time." Lily smiled, not pitying but understanding. "Then maybe it's waiting for you to let it." That night after she left the greenhouse, Damien remained among the plants for nearly an hour. The scent of damp soil and blooming jasmine filled the air, mingling with the memory of his mother's laughter echoing faintly through the years. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his mother had not just raised him to be intelligent, she had wanted him to be human. Somewhere between ambition and betrayal, he had forgotten that lesson. In the days that followed, subtle transformation began to ripple through the mansion. Damien started greeting the staff personally, a gesture so unexpected that whispers spread among them like sparks. The once intimidating figure who barely acknowledged anyone now asked small questions. "How's your family?" he asked the gardener. "Is your son still studying law?" he asked one of the chefs. Each response surprised him. The world he had isolated himself from began to unfold in stories of simple struggle and hope. He found himself listening, and in listening, he began to see the humanity that his empire had buried beneath spreadsheets and contracts. Meanwhile, Lily noticed the changes but said nothing. She simply continued her work with quiet consistency, as though unaware of the influence she carried. But she noticed the subtle difference in Mr. Blackwood's eyes. Less glass, more reflection. Sometimes when she entered the observatory to clean, she'd find him already there, looking through the telescope, his hands clasped behind his back. One evening he surprised her by speaking first. "Do you ever look at the stars, Miss Adams?" he asked, his tone softer than she'd ever heard. "Every chance I get," she replied. "They remind me that the world is bigger than our problems." He turned toward her, studying the calm certainty in her expression. "I used to think they were distant, cold, unreachable. Now I'm not so sure," she smiled faintly. "Maybe they're not meant to be reached. Maybe they're meant to guide." It was the same line his mother had once spoken to him when he was a boy. The brightest stars guide, not shine. The coincidence shook him to his core. For a long moment he said nothing, only looked through the telescope again, his thoughts spiraling through past and present like threads finally meeting. By the end of that week, the entire household felt lighter. The staff laughed quietly during lunch breaks. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, and even Mrs. Cole hummed while arranging flowers, something she hadn't done in years. But change often brings its tests. One afternoon, a security alert buzzed through the mansion's main server. Damien was in the middle of a meeting when his tablet lit up red. Unauthorized external access detected. Employee ID L. Adams. His chest tightened, not out of anger, but disbelief. Within minutes, he dismissed his executives and stormed into the control room. Nathan Graves, his security chief, met him at the monitors. "Sir, looks like Miss Adams's login credentials were used to access encrypted design files from your research division. She claims she didn't do it." Damien's voice was ice. "Show me." The footage appeared, Lily entering the data room to deliver cleaning supplies, her ID badge triggering the sensor. Minutes later, the system recorded unauthorized file activity. To anyone else, it looked like sabotage. For a man whose life had been defined by betrayal, the old reflexes kicked in immediately. But somewhere deep within him, another voice, a quieter, unfamiliar, but whispered, "Trust once." When he confronted Lily in the staff quarters, she was pale but composed. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know how my badge was used. I've never even touched your data systems." Damien studied her face for any trace of deceit. There was none. Her eyes met his directly, filled not with fear but pain that he could even doubt her. He realized then that the woman standing before him was incapable of manipulation. Still, the facts seemed immovable. "I want to believe you," he said quietly, "but this company was nearly destroyed once because I trusted the wrong person. And how many good people have you punished because of that one?" She asked gently. Her words pierced him deeper than any accusation could. He turned away, his jaw tense. "Until I know the truth, you'll have to remain off duty." Lily nodded, though her heart sank. "Of course, sir. I understand." That night, Damien couldn't sleep. He re-examined the data himself, line by line, code by code, until his eyes blurred. Finally, he discovered a small detail. The file access didn't originate from her terminal at all. It was a signal relay from a device disguised as a maintenance router. A breach planted by someone else entirely. The realization hit him like thunder. He had doubted the only person who had shown him compassion without agenda. The next morning, before sunrise, he found her outside by the cliffs, standing near the edge, her hair swept by the ocean wind. She looked lost in thought, yet peaceful, as though she'd already forgiven him. He approached quietly. "Miss Adams," he said, his voice barely audible over the crashing waves. She turned, offering a faint, tired smile. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." He exhaled, the weight of guilt pressing against his chest. "You were right. Someone framed you. I found the breach." You don't owe me an apology," she interrupted softly. "Distrust is a hard habit to break." "I owe you far more than that," he said. "You've done something no one else ever has. You've made me see what kind of man I've become." Her eyes softened. Then maybe it was worth it. They stood there in silence, the ocean roaring beneath them, the dawn painting the sky in pale gold. For the first time, Damien felt something he hadn't felt since childhood, the quiet peace of forgiveness, both given and received. That day marked the true beginning of change, not just for Damien Blackwood's empire, but for the man himself. The walls of his glass fortress had begun to crack, and through those cracks, light was finally finding its way in. The days following the storm of accusation passed like slow-moving clouds after rainfall, heavy with reflection, yet edged with a faint shimmer of renewal. The Blackwood estate stood bathed in early spring sunlight, its glass walls glowing with a warmth they had never known before. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation and precision, had begun to breathe differently. Every surface seemed to carry traces of life. The faint scent of flowers arranged by Lily's careful hands, the echo of staff laughter drifting faintly through the corridors, the hum of gentle music that Damien had begun to allow through the central audio system. For years he had kept his world soundproof, both literally and emotionally, as though silence could protect him from the noise of betrayal. But now, silence no longer felt safe. It felt empty. Lily had resumed her duties, her presence quiet yet transformative, like a candle whose flame never sought attention, but managed to illuminate everything around it. Damien noticed that wherever she worked, the atmosphere softened. The staff were kinder, the rooms brighter. Even time itself seemed to slow down in her company. It wasn't something that could be measured or explained through logic. Yet Damien, a man of systems and data, found himself wanting to understand it. He began to appear in the very places she worked, always with some excuse. Checking the ventilation systems, reviewing the art maintenance schedule, or inspecting the oceanside windows for structural wear. But the truth was simpler. He was learning to feel again, and she had become his teacher without ever knowing it. One morning, Damien found himself standing on the terrace that overlooked the sea, his mind strangely calm. He had not attended his company's headquarters in nearly 2 weeks, instead working remotely from the estate. For a man who had once been unable to spend a single day without spreadsheets and board meetings, the shift was monumental. When Nathan Graves, his security chief, arrived to deliver a progress report, Damien waved him off gently. "I'll read it later," he said. "Tell the team to rest." Nathan, a man who had known his employer for over a decade, left quietly, bewildered but quietly relieved. For the first time, Damien's commands carried empathy, not pressure. Later that day, he found Lily in the library, arranging old books into chronological order. The library was a cathedral of glass and oak, tall shelves lined with literature and journals from centuries past, dust motes drifting like tiny galaxies in the sunlight. She looked so at ease there that for a moment Damien forgot he owned the place. "You're cataloging them," he observed quietly, leaning against the doorway. She turned, startled but smiling. "Yes, sir. I noticed some of the older volumes were out of order. I hope that's all right." "It's more than all right," he said. "I didn't even know anyone touched this room anymore." "It's beautiful," she replied. "Books remember things. Sometimes I think they hold pieces of the people who've read them. Maybe that's why they never truly age." He looked around at the shelves as though seeing them for the first time. "My mother used to sit here," he said, almost to himself. "She would read poetry to me when I was a boy. She said words could mend the parts of us that life breaks." Lily smiled faintly, her eyes soft with understanding. Then she was right. Words are like sunlight. They reach even where we think there's no light left. He watched her return to her work, her fingers brushing the spines of books as if greeting old friends. The sight stirred something long buried in him. The echo of warmth, the idea that gentleness wasn't weakness but strength disguised as stillness. In that moment he realized how long he had lived mistaking control for peace. That night, Damien opened his private journal, a document he hadn't written in for years. The entries from a decade ago were filled with fury, ambition, and distrust. Words scrawled like battle scars across digital pages. But this time his writing was different. "I met someone who doesn't chase power yet changes the world around her effortlessly. She reminds me that trust is not a risk. It's the soil where life grows." He paused, staring at the words. He wasn't sure if he was writing about Lily or the version of himself he wished to rediscover. Maybe both. The following morning, a rare storm rolled in from the Pacific, bringing rain that lashed against the glass panels like wild applause. The mansion dimmed, its usual glow subdued under gray clouds. The staff worked quietly, and Lily moved through the halls with a light raincoat, checking windows for leaks. When she reached the east atrium, she found Damien standing alone by the glass wall, watching the thunder break over the ocean. He looked different, not in his tailored clothing or posture, but in the quietness of his face. It was no longer a mask of calculation. It was the expression of a man learning how to see again. "Storms remind me of my father," he said without turning. "He used to tell me that lightning doesn't destroy the sky. It just shows us how powerful it really is." Lily stepped closer, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "He must have been a wise man. He was complicated," Damien said, "brilliant but impatient. He wanted me to build something indestructible, a company that couldn't be touched, a life that couldn't be broken. And I did. But in doing so, I think I forgot how to live inside it." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why life sent you storms, sir. To remind you that perfection isn't the goal. Connection is." He turned then, meeting her gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look like the unshakable titan of industry. He looked human, quietly, profoundly human. "You speak as if you've known loss," he said. Lily's eyes dropped for a moment, her voice softening. "I have. My mother passed when I was 17. I've been working ever since to keep my brother in school. But I've learned that pain doesn't have to harden us. It can also teach us compassion if we let it." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words like scripture. "Compassion," he repeated. "The one virtue I used to call a weakness," she smiled gently. Maybe that's why you're rediscovering it now. The things we reject often come back as lessons. A heavy silence followed, not awkward, but filled with quiet understanding. Outside, the rain began to ease, the first beam of sunlight piercing through the clouds, landing directly across the floor between them. For a brief moment, it looked as if the mansion itself were breathing relief. In the days that followed, Damien began to reimagine his empire from the inside out. He called an emergency board meeting at headquarters, his first public appearance in months. When he entered the conference room, the executives expected another clinical address about expansion and profits. Instead, he spoke about humanity. "We've built walls," he said, his voice steady. "Walls of firewalls, walls of code, walls of ambition. But what we've forgotten," he paused, scanning the room, "is that walls protect, yes, but they also isolate. We can secure the world's data, but if we can't secure our own integrity, we've failed." The boardroom fell silent, stunned. Damien continued. "From today forward, Blackwood Systems will prioritize ethical innovation, transparency, privacy with dignity. We won't build systems that spy. We'll build systems that protect freedom." When the meeting ended, the board members exchanged glances of disbelief but also respect. Word of Damien's declaration spread across the company like wildfire. Employees who had grown accustomed to his cold efficiency now saw a leader guided by conscience. For the first time in years, the company's internal communications were flooded not with directives, but with gratitude. Back at the mansion, Lily continued her work quietly, unaware of the speech that was already making headlines. She was polishing the observatory railing when Mrs. Cole approached her with a warm smile. "You've done something extraordinary, dear," she said. "You've woken him up." Lily looked confused. "I haven't done anything, ma'am. He's the one who's changing." Mrs. Cole chuckled softly. "Sometimes it only takes one good soul to remind another what they've lost." That evening, Damien returned home earlier than usual. The rain had returned, softer this time, falling in rhythmic sheets against the glass dome. He found Lily again in the observatory, this time gazing through the telescope at a break in the clouds where a few stars managed to pierce the gloom. "What do you see?" he asked quietly from behind her. She smiled without turning. "The same thing I always see, sir. Light trying to find its way through darkness." He stepped closer, his reflection beside hers in the telescope's lens. "Do you ever wonder if people are like that too?" "I think we are," she said. "We spend years hiding behind shadows, thinking it's safer. But light always finds a way in, if we let it." Her words struck him again, and this time he didn't try to hide how much they moved him. "You've changed me, Lily," he said, his tone carrying both gratitude and awe. "I didn't think that was possible." She turned to face him, her expression kind but firm. "You changed yourself, sir." "I just reminded you who you were meant to be." The silence that followed was filled not with tension but peace. The sound of rain softened, the room dimly lit by the moon's faint silver glow through the dome. Damien realized that for the first time in his adult life he felt alive, not because of victory or wealth, but because of understanding. He finally saw that power meant nothing without purpose, and purpose meant nothing without heart. In the weeks that followed, his transformation became impossible to ignore. The mansion, once a fortress of solitude, began to host charity events and educational programs for underprivileged youth. Damien started a foundation under his mother's name, funding scholarships for young students. The first recipient was Lily's brother Daniel, though she didn't discover it until months later. When she found out, she confronted him in disbelief. "You didn't have to do that," she said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know," he replied softly. "But sometimes doing what we don't have to do is the only way to prove who we've become." The moment hung in the air, quiet and profound. There were no grand gestures, no confessions, just mutual understanding, the kind that runs deeper than words. As spring turned to summer, the Blackwood estate transformed into a place of warmth, laughter, and purpose. The man who had once built his life around glass and steel now built it around gratitude and human connection. And though Damien and Lily remained bound by respect and professional boundaries, there existed between them a silent thread of kinship, a shared recognition that sometimes two souls meet not to complete each other, but to awaken what was sleeping within. On one late evening, as the stars shimmered over the Pacific and the house hummed with quiet life, Damien stood once more in the observatory, the place where everything had begun. The telescope pointed upward, reflecting constellations against his eyes. He thought of his mother, of the boy he once was, of the man he was still becoming, and he thought of Lily, the woman who had walked into his fortress and reminded him that walls were meant to protect, not imprison. He smiled to himself, not with pride, but peace. For the first time in years, Damien Blackwood didn't feel like the richest man in the room. He simply felt whole. Summer came to the coast like a slow-burning flame, gilding the ocean in molten gold each morning and turning the Blackwood estate into a prism of light. The transformation of Damien Blackwood's world was now visible not only in the shimmer of its glass walls, but in the heartbeat that pulsed through every corridor. The mansion, once sterile and echoing, had become a place of laughter, conversation, and renewal. The air that once carried the mechanical hum of machines now carried the scent of fresh roses, and the distant sound of piano music played by the younger staff in the evenings. Damien often found himself walking the halls without purpose, simply listening, marveling at how much life had returned to a house that had long been nothing more than a monument to control. Yet as peace often does, it carried within it the seed of the next storm. The Blackwood Foundation, launched in honor of his mother, had become the center of public admiration. Reporters hailed Damien as a visionary philanthropist, a man who had shifted from empire to empathy. But not everyone believed in redemption. In the shadows of his success, former associates who had once profited from his ruthless ambition now whispered accusations of hypocrisy. Among them was Adrian Kane, a former executive Damien had dismissed years earlier for unethical practices. Kane had built a rival company and nursed a quiet vendetta. When the world began praising Damien's transformation, jealousy turned to vengeance. "No one changes that fast," Kane told the press. "Behind every saint's speech lies a sinner's secret." The rumors began as faint murmurs, but within weeks they became a storm of suspicion. Anonymous articles appeared online, claiming that the Blackwood Foundation was a facade for tax evasion, that its scholarships were bribes, that the billionaire's sudden kindness hid darker motives. Lily Adams first learned of the controversy through whispers among the staff. One morning she found the kitchen unusually quiet, the televisions playing news segments about the Blackwood question. Her heart sank at the coldness of the reporter's tone. She had seen the change in Damien with her own eyes. She had watched the walls of his isolation crumble piece by piece, replaced by sincerity that no camera could fake. Yet she knew the world rarely believed in redemption because it feared to confront its own capacity for cruelty. When she entered the study that morning, Damien was already there, standing by the window, his phone buzzing relentlessly on the desk. The light from the sea cast long reflections across his face, making him look both strong and weary at once. "They think I'm lying," he said quietly, not looking at her. "They think this is another performance. You can't control what they believe," she replied gently. "You can only keep proving who you are." He turned toward her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his composure cracked. "But how? Every word I say now sounds like defense, every silence sounds like guilt. I built this house to keep the world out. Now that I've finally opened its doors, they want to tear them off the hinges." Lily stepped closer, her voice calm, almost maternal. "Then let them look, sir. Let them see everything, not the power, not the perfection, but the truth. People can distrust words, but they recognize integrity when it stands before them." Her conviction steadied him more than any legal strategy could. That afternoon he called a press conference. Not from the headquarters, not from a hotel ballroom, but from his home. For the first time in his career, he invited journalists into the very heart of his world. The cameras rolled as the gates of the estate opened and reporters stepped into the glass atrium, their reflections multiplying across mirrored walls. Damien stood at the center, wearing a simple gray suit instead of his usual tailored armor. Lily watched from the upper balcony, her hands clasped together, silently praying that the world would see what she saw. When he began to speak, his voice was steady but stripped of performance. "For years," he said, "I built an empire on the belief that safety meant control and that power meant victory. I was wrong. What I built protected data but not dignity. I forgot that technology exists to serve people, not rule them. When I realized how far I'd strayed, I dismantled my own fortress, starting with these walls. If transparency is what you demand, then here it is. This home, this company, this foundation, They are open to your scrutiny. You will find mistakes. I am not the man who is perfect. I am the man who is learning. And if my repentance makes you uncomfortable, perhaps it's because we all know how hard it is to change when the world profits from our flaws. The room fell silent. Even the reporters lowered their pens for a moment. Damien's confession was not rehearsed. It was raw. Cameras caught the faint tremor in his hand, the subtle glimmer in his eyes when he mentioned his mother. He concluded simply, "If I am judged for trying to become better, then let that judgment stand. But I will not go back to the man I was." The footage aired worldwide within hours, and while some critics remained cynical, the sincerity of his tone disarmed many. The narrative began to shift. Viewers flooded social media with messages of support. Employees at Blackwood Systems organized a voluntary donation drive for the foundation. Yet behind the scenes, Adrian Kane was not finished. Unable to discredit Damien's character publicly, he turned to sabotage. One night, an anonymous source leaked fabricated documents implying that Damien had personally profited from the foundation's funds. The leak spread rapidly. Stocks trembled. Investigations began, and just like that, the empire that had taken 2 decades to rebuild teetered on the edge of collapse once again. Damien's advisors urged him to stay silent until the lawyers intervened. But silence was the very weapon that had once imprisoned him. This time he refused to hide. "Find me the truth," he told his cybersecurity team. "Trace the source." For 3 sleepless nights he pored over encrypted trails and digital fingerprints, working alongside the same analysts who once feared to speak in his presence. Lily watched him quietly during those nights, bringing him coffee, forcing him to rest when exhaustion blurred his vision. At one point he looked up from his screen and said, half in disbelief, "You should hate this place, the chaos, the scandal. But you stay." "I stay because truth is louder than noise," she said. "And because you're fighting for the right reasons now." By the 4th night, Damien found it. The breach had originated from Kane's subsidiary servers, cleverly disguised under shell accounts. The discovery was irrefutable. Rather than issue an angry rebuttal, Damien chose a different path. He called Kane directly. "Adrian," he said calmly, "I know what you've done. You can expose 1,000 lies, but you'll still live in the shadow of your own. I'm not calling for revenge. I'm calling for release. Stop fighting ghosts." The line went silent before Kane finally replied, voice trembling. "You think forgiveness is victory?" Damien answered, "No, it's freedom." And with that, he ended the call. The next day, Kane's lawyers publicly confessed to the falsification of records. The scandal evaporated as quickly as it had erupted, leaving the public in awe of Damien's restraint. The stock rebounded, the foundation received record donations, and the media that once doubted him now called his response a masterclass in moral leadership. But to Damien, the true victory lay elsewhere. That night, when the house finally fell quiet, he walked to the observatory where Lily was cleaning the telescope. Rain misted softly against the dome, blurring the stars into faint halos. "You were right again," he said. "The truth did its own defending." She looked up from her work, her expression serene. "It always does, eventually. Lies burn fast, but truth endures." He stepped closer, his voice lower, reflective. "When I lost everything years ago, I thought betrayal was the worst pain a person could feel. I was wrong. The greater pain was losing faith in others, in myself. You helped me find it again." Lily smiled, her eyes luminous in the half-light. "You found it because you stopped guarding your heart like a vault. People aren't meant to be encrypted, Mr. Blackwood. They're meant to be understood." For a long moment they stood in silence, watching the fog drift across the sea. The air between them carried neither tension nor confession, only mutual reverence, the recognition that some bonds transcend the need for labels. Outside, the waves crashed like a steady heartbeat, and inside, Damien felt for the first time that his mother's spirit might be smiling somewhere above. Over the following weeks, he began inviting local youth to the mansion for workshops on technology and ethics. Lily coordinated the programs, teaching them discipline through care and responsibility through empathy. Children ran through the halls that had once known only footsteps of fear. Damien often watched them from the terrace, his expression soft with wonder. The estate had finally become what it was always meant to be, a place of light. But fate, relentless teacher that it is, offered one more test. Late one afternoon, a fire broke out in the west storage wing, caused by a short circuit in the generator system. The alarm blared and staff rushed to evacuate. Damien was in the east garden when he heard the call. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the smoke. The fire suppression system had activated, but one of the interior doors jammed electronically. Lily was inside, helping two of the younger staff exit through a back corridor. When Damien reached the control panel, sparks hissed from the circuitry. Without a thought for protocol, he forced the lock manually, scorching his hands as the metal seared his skin. He pushed through the smoke, shouting her name. "Lily!" She appeared through the haze, coughing but calm, guiding the last worker out. "Everyone's safe," she shouted. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the exit, shielding her from falling debris. When they finally stumbled outside into the open air, drenched and exhausted, she turned to him, eyes wide with concern. His hands were blistered, his face streaked with soot. "You could have been killed," she cried. He smiled faintly, breathing hard. "You once told me balance was what keeps things alive. I couldn't let imbalance take that from us." Firefighters arrived moments later, and the damage was contained. The following morning, as sunlight returned to the soot-stained courtyard, Lily found him on the terrace, his hands bandaged but his expression tranquil. "You didn't have to save me," she said softly. He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Maybe not, but sometimes saving someone else is the only way to prove we've truly been saved ourselves." Her eyes filled, not with tears of sorrow, but of quiet pride. "You're not the man you used to be." "No," he agreed. "Thanks to you, I finally became the man my mother hoped I would be." That evening, as the sun descended in molten splendor over the Pacific, the Blackwood estate stood resilient against the fading light. Its glass walls no longer symbols of separation but of transparency, reflecting both the world outside and the humanity within. The storms had tested every layer of its foundation, and yet what remained was stronger, purer, unshakable. In the observatory where it had all begun, Damien and Lily stood side by side once more, watching the first stars emerge from the dusk. "Do you think peace lasts forever?" he asked quietly. "Peace isn't meant to last," she answered. "It's meant to remind us what's worth fighting for when the next storm comes." He nodded slowly, gazing at the horizon where the sea met the sky. "Then I suppose we'll be ready." And in that moment, bathed in the silver light of rebirth, surrounded by the echoes of forgiveness, courage, and grace, Damien Blackwood understood the final truth his mother had tried to teach him all those years ago: that strength without compassion is emptiness, but compassion tested by fire becomes wisdom. Autumn descended over the Monterey coastline like a painter, brushing soft gold across the fading edges of summer. The Pacific wind had grown gentler, and the gardens of the Blackwood estate swayed with russet leaves that shimmered like liquid fire beneath the afternoon sun. It had been 6 months since the fire, and yet the house seemed reborn again, not merely repaired but alive, as though each pane of glass now held within it the memory of endurance. The world beyond the mansion had changed as well. Damien Blackwood's story had spread far beyond California, becoming a modern parable of redemption, echoed in speeches, documentaries, and classrooms. But the man himself no longer cared for recognition. He found peace not in headlines or markets, but in moments. The sound of laughter echoing from the youth workshops, the sight of his staff eating together in the courtyard, the letters from scholarship recipients who wrote to thank him for believing in futures they had nearly abandoned. Lily Adams had remained at the estate, not as a housekeeper now, but as the director of the Blackwood Foundation's community division. The transition had been Damien's insistence, though she had resisted at first, arguing that she had no experience running programs or leading teams. But he had simply smiled and said, "Experience teaches skill, Lily. Compassion teaches leadership. You have both." She had accepted reluctantly, though the decision had proven prophetic. Under her care, the foundation expanded beyond its original structure, reaching into rural schools, supporting hospitals, and funding small-town innovation programs. Her vision gave it soul. His resources gave it wings. Together they built something that wasn't measured in profits but in possibilities. Their friendship, for that was what it remained, had deepened into a quiet companionship rooted in mutual respect. They spoke less of the past now and more of purpose. Sometimes they shared long silences in the observatory, watching the sky shift through shades of indigo, content simply to exist in the same space. There was no need for declarations or confessions. Theirs was a bond not born of romance but of recognition. Two souls who had walked through darkness and found light in each other's reflection. Yet even peace, like the tide, carries the rhythm of departure. One morning, as the gulls wheeled over the cliffside and the sea gleamed with silver frost, Lily received a letter from her brother Daniel. He had been offered a graduate research fellowship abroad, a chance to study renewable energy technology in Switzerland. "It's my dream, Lily," he wrote, "but it means leaving sooner than expected. The foundation gave me the chance to reach this far. Tell Mr. Blackwood I'll make him proud." Lily felt tears rise as she read the words. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for, the very dream that had carried her through years of exhaustion and sacrifice. That evening, she found Damien in his study, reading under the soft glow of an amber lamp. When she handed him the letter, he smiled. "So it's time," he said quietly. She nodded, unable to hide the emotion in her eyes. "He leaves in 2 weeks. I should go with him for a while, help him settle." "Of course," he said. "He deserves this." "And so do you." For a long moment they said nothing, the unspoken weight of goodbye hovering between them. Finally, Lily broke the silence. "When I came here, I just wanted to earn enough to give him a chance. I never imagined this place would change me too." Damien leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same thoughtful calm he always had. "It changed both of us, Lily. You gave it meaning." "You gave me meaning," she smiled softly. "Maybe we were both just reminders. You showed me that strength can heal, and I showed you that gentleness isn't weakness. That's the paradox of life," he said. "We spend half of it guarding ourselves from pain, only to realize that pain is the doorway to understanding." She looked around the study, the books, the photographs, the view of the Pacific stretching endlessly beyond the glass. "What will you do now, sir? You've rebuilt everything. Your company, your foundation, your peace. What's left?" He gazed toward the horizon, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Legacy," he said simply. "Not the kind that's carved on buildings, but the kind that lives in people. I want to make sure this place keeps giving long after I'm gone." The following days were filled with preparations for Lily's departure. The staff threw her a farewell dinner in the garden, stringing lanterns through the trees and playing music that drifted over the waves. Damien sat quietly at the head of the table, watching her laugh with the younger employees, realizing how much warmth she had brought into every life she touched. When the night drew to a close and the guests had gone, he walked her to the terrace where the sea glimmered under a crescent moon. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already have," she replied. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." He nodded slowly. "Then promise me one thing, never stop believing in others. The world will need your kind of hope." She reached out her hand and he took it, holding it firmly, not as an employer but as a friend, as someone whose life had been irrevocably changed by another's courage. "Goodbye, Mr. Blackwood." "Goodbye, Lily," he said, though part of him knew that goodbyes were illusions. Connections like theirs didn't end, they simply transformed. After she left, the mansion felt quieter, though not empty. It was a silence filled with memory rather than loneliness. Damien continued his work with renewed clarity. He turned his focus toward creating an academy, a learning center that would combine technology, ethics, and human development. He called it the Eliza Institute in honor of his mother, with a motto carved in stone at its entrance: strength through compassion, vision through humility. The first class of students arrived the following spring, many of them from families who had once been supported by the foundation. Damien often walked among them during lectures, listening, guiding, sharing not formulas of profit but lessons of purpose. One afternoon, as he was giving a seminar on innovation, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. "You sound like a philosopher now," said Lily, smiling as she stepped into the hall. Damien turned, momentarily stunned, before a genuine smile broke across his face. "You came back, only to visit," she said, laughing. "Daniel's doing well. He sent you this." She handed him a small framed photograph of her brother standing beside a solar energy prototype, his expression filled with pride. Beneath it was a note: "For the man who taught me that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around." Damien looked at it for a long time before setting it carefully on his desk. You were right about legacy, Lily said quietly. It isn't about names or wealth. It's about the lives we touch. He nodded, emotion tightening his throat, and the courage it takes to touch them. They walked through the gardens as the sun began to set, talking about the foundation's new branches, about the children who had found hope where there once was none, about how life's endings always disguise new beginnings. When they reached the observatory, the sky was already dark, scattered with stars. The telescope still stood there, polished and ready, the same one that had once witnessed their first meeting. Do you still watch the stars? She asked softly. Every night, he said. They remind me of the people who guide us, not by staying, but by shining just long enough for us to find our way. She smiled. Then I suppose my work here is done? He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. No, Lily, your work is everywhere now. They stood together in silence, the universe unfolding above them, vast and eternal. Somewhere between the constellations and the whispering ocean below, their story found its quiet completion, not in grand gestures, not in perfect endings, but in the simple truth that redemption is not a destination but a journey, and that even the coldest hearts can learn to beat again when touched by light. Years later, people would speak of Damien Blackwood not as the man who built a fortune, but as the man who built faith in change, in integrity, in the human spirit. And somewhere in the archives of the Foundation, preserved alongside the documents and achievements, there would remain a single handwritten note, penned by him on the day Lily first arrived. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness become the sparks that rebuild the world. And so the legacy of light continued. A living testament that no life is too broken to be mended, no heart too guarded to be moved, and no mistake too deep to be redeemed by compassion and truth.